Hey, Low Post listeners, this week on the podcast, we have Howard Beck of Bleacher Report talking Serge Ibaka, Kevin Love, the MVP race, and his great feature on Thon the Curve.
This is the Stephen A. Smith Show podcast.
I'm Stephen A. Welcome to the latest edition of the Stephen A. Smith Show, coming at you as I love to do every weekday afternoon on 98.7 FM. ESPN New York, every weekday morning, 710 ESPN LA. And, of course, over the national airwaves of ESPN Radio on Sirius XM, Channel 80. Number to call up, as always, is 866-729-ESPN. That's 866-729-3776. We've got two stories resonating nationwide on this particular day. I am coming at you live from the city of New Orleans, Louisiana, site of this weekend's NBA All-Star festivities. I will be here today and tomorrow broadcasting from this location. I am looking forward to it. And obviously we will get into a lot of basketball talk, particularly with the trading deadline rapidly approaching, being a week from today. Who knows what moves will be made? I'm in a city that Anthony Davis holds dominion over on the basketball landscape, although the team stinks. And obviously Drew Brees is the man in this town, although the New Orleans Saints defense stinks. That's a subject for another day, and I'll get into all of that. But on this particular day, we're going to be talking about a few things. Draymond Green calling James Dolan of the New York Knicks, accusing him, rather, of having a slave mentality. And, of course, the governor from the state of Texas, Mr. Greg Abbott, warning the NFL, accusing it of walking on thin ice in regards to the bathroom bill warning involving transgender folks and beyond. It's just that kind of show today, ladies and gentlemen. It's just that kind of show today. The number to call up, as always, is 866-729-ESPN. That's 866-729-3776. First things first, Draymond Green. Y'all heard what he had to say. And, Nuno, do we have that sound for those in case they didn't hear what he had to say? I believe that we do. You want to hear what Draymond Green of the Golden State Warriors had to say? Listen to what he had to say about New York Knicks owner James Dolan as it pertained to his treatment last week of Charles Oakley, who he had forcibly removed from the corridors of Madison Square Garden. Listen to Draymond Green here.
This is Charles Oakley. Why is he buying tickets to the game? If I'm not mistaken, Dolan's was owning that team when he was playing. It wasn't a problem when he was speaking out then. It wasn't a problem when he was protecting their superstars then. And so if it wasn't a problem then when he were doing it for y'all, why is it all of a sudden a problem now when he speak out on something that he don't like? And now you want to disown him from your entire organization. That's a slave mentality. You're doing it for me, it's all good. But now you're doing it against me, or not necessarily against me, but you're speaking out against my organization. It's not good anymore. That's a slave mentality, slave master mentality. That's ridiculous. It was all fine and dandy when he was laying people out, taking fines.
Out Jordan, right?
Taking fines and all this stuff for your organization. But now all of a sudden when he says something that he feels, it's a problem. I disagree with that. I definitely think, like I said, that that's a slave master mentality.
Couple of things to point out here. First of all, when Charles Oakley was playing for the New York Knicks, when he was playing for the New York Knicks, it was from 1988 to 1998. A 10-year span in which the New York Knicks went to the Eastern Conference semifinals 9 times. There were no championships to speak of, but they were clearly the glory days when you label those in comparison to what the hell we've been witnessing from the New York Knicks over the last 17 years. At that particular moment in time, James Dolan wasn't really presiding over the Knicks. He was an infant in the business at that particular time, and it was at the tail end of Oakley's career because Oakley was really there protecting Patrick Ewing's backside and being the enforcer for the New York Knicks when James Dolan's father, Charles Dolan, was in charge of Cablevision in Madison Square Garden. And other individuals were working beside him. And Dave Checkens was running Madison Square Garden. And Ernie Grunfeld was the general manager. And Pat Riley was the head coach, followed by Jeff Van Gundy. That wasn't under James Dolan's stewardship. He was a puppy in the business being groomed to ultimately take over. That's point number one. Point number two, I'm on the record saying that I love me some Draymond Green. He could play for my team any day, but I think he was a bit excessive, unnecessarily so in this particular sequence in regards to his words about James Dolan. You can call James Dolan overbearing. You can call him an insecure bully. You can call him petty. But slave mentality, what facts do you have to back that up? You talk about Charles Oakley having to buy a ticket. Well, Charles Oakley has been on the record insulting and denigrating James Dolan's stewardship over the New York Knicks. Charles Oakley's very honest. He's very candid. The New York Knicks stink. He didn't hesitate to say so. And in Dolan's mind, he doesn't like that. So he's not somebody that's inclined to ingratiate himself with you if you take that kind of mentality. But more importantly, to point out, and I said this on First Take this morning on ESPN, I've said this on a radio show yesterday, I'll say it again. Nobody wants to hear professional athletes uttering the word slave or slavery or slave master mentality. And I know professional athletes are going to sit out there and say, oh, it ain't right because we're making millions. Y'all think that we don't have a right to our opinions and stuff like that. There are people who think like that, and they are wrong. The money that you make has nothing to do with it. But the reality of the situation, the word slave or slavery or slave master invokes something far more insidious. And to a degree, it's diminishing and minimizing what our ancestors truly endured. They weren't even paid labor. They were literally enslaved. And when you bring up that word, you had damn well better have something to back it up other than Oakley being removed from Madison Square Garden after security asked him to leave, and he decided to put his hand on three people where they literally have legal grounds for lawsuits against him. Can't do that. Now, make no mistake, there are athletes who feel the way that Draymond Green feels. And I'm here to tell you, Draymond Green and others have the right to say what they say. And there's validity to what they say in other instances in terms of how they're communicated to and how they're treated by some of these folks who have dominion and authority over them because they're owners. I'm talking about football players. I'm talking about a Reggie White, God rest his soul, when he was alive, and Norman Brayman, the former owner for the Philadelphia Eagles, looking him in the face and telling him he owns you. I'm talking about Jerry Krause alluding to such stuff with his verbiage when he looked in the face of Michael Jordan because Michael Jordan had missed about 63 games his second year in the NBA and wanted to come back and play, and Jerry Krause tried to dictate to him when he'd be allowed to come back or not. I'm talking about things like that. When you talk to people in a certain kind of way and you treat them in a diminished and denigrating fashion, you may have a point based on personal experience, but on the outside looking in, not understanding and knowing all the requisite information necessary to label James Dolan in that way, I don't think you can get away with that if you're Draymond Green. Not when James Dolan has a record of hiring minorities. Not when he has a record of actually sincere and genuine philanthropy. Not when his pettiness, his insecure tendencies, and other negative connotations that could easily be attached to him were applicable to everybody, not just black dudes. You just can't say that and expect it to have any validity to it. 866-729-ESPN is the number to call up. That's 866-729-3776. That's my take on Draymond Green with James Dolan. But I'm not finished. I want to touch on what Governor Abbott of Texas had to say about the NFL as well before I took your phone calls. Stick around. You're listening to Stephen A. on ESPN Radio.
The 2017 NBA All-Star Game. DeRozan, Kyrie, and LeBron lead the Eastern Stars into New Orleans.
Butler throws it down with two hands.
Wow.
Kyrie Irving. James splits a double, drives and throws it home.
To face the West, led by Kawhi, Durant, and Curry.
James Harden stirring it up. Durant throws it down. Nothing but net. Steph Curry.
Coverage begins Sunday at 7:30 Eastern on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app. You're listening to the Stephen A. Smith Show podcast.
You know something? To close out my comments on Draymond Green in regards to James Dolan, let me say this as a black man in this country. One of the things that concern me a great deal is our penchant as a community to empower and position others to minimize the real issues involving racism because we jump on it at every turn. When you bring up slave mentality and slave master and you invoke the word slavery, which obviously emanates from racism, and it's in the context of Oakley and a beef with James Dolan, if we're willing to go to that extent, why should anybody outside of the black community listen to what we have to say? If that is something that could simply be interpreted as racism, as opposed to James Dolan simply not liking Charles Oakley, why even bother having a discussion with us? Just something I think folks need to think about, particularly those of us in the black community. And I said us. I didn't say them. I'm a black man and proud of it. Ain't nothing in the world I would rather be. And I'm not distancing myself from that. But it doesn't make us right all the time. And I think this is one of those cases where we need to all think about that. Not just Draymond Green, all of us. 866-729-ESPN. That's 866-729-3776. Other issue I want to get to. The NFL was warned by Texas Governor Greg Abbott that they are walking on thin ice with this bathroom rule. I'm reading from a story online, various stories, ESPN, New York papers, LA papers, this article called The Guardian online, all of this other stuff. Here's what it says essentially. The NFL sharpened its warning to Texas on Friday about a quote-unquote bathroom bill targeting transgender people, suggesting for the first time that the football-crazed state could miss out on hosting another Super Bowl if the proposal is enacted. Quote, if a proposal that is discriminatory or inconsistent with our values were to become law there, that would certainly be a factor considered when thinking about awarding future events. This is from NFL League spokesman Brian McCarthy in a response to an email question about the Texas bill. The quote-unquote veiled threat prompted blowback from Texas Republican Governor Greg Abbott, who told conservative radio host Glenn Beck on Tuesday that the NFL, quote, is walking on thin ice, end quote, by wading into social issues. Governor Abbott went on to say this: the NFL needs to concentrate on playing football and get the heck out of politics. For some low-level NFL advisor to come out and say that they are going to micromanage and try to dictate to the state of Texas what types of policies we're going to pass in our state, that's unacceptable. We don't care what the NFL thinks, and certainly what their political policies are, because they are not a political arm of the state of Texas or of the United States of America. They need to learn their place in the United States, which is to govern football, not politics. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, let me serve this as a reminder, ladies and gentlemen. I am down here in New Orleans for NBA All-Star Weekend. I was supposed to be in Charlotte, North Carolina. But the reason why we're in New Orleans, Louisiana, is because the state of North Carolina had their own bathroom bill perceived as targeting transgender people. And as a result, the NBA didn't want any parts of that and moved this year's All-Star game and its weekend festivities to New Orleans, Louisiana. Now, based on what the Republican is saying, the Republican governor, Greg Abbott, is saying, think about this. The NFL has selected future Super Bowl sites through 2021, none of which are in Texas already. Dallas hosted the game in 2011, and 3 Super Bowls have been played in Texas since 2004, 2 in Houston, 1 in Dallas, which is second only to Florida. Now, we're talking about the Texas bill here, which would basically people would be required to use bathrooms that correspond to the sex on their birth certificate. Changing your sex through operative procedures and all of that stuff, the state of Texas ain't trying to have that. If your birth certificate says you're a man, you're a man. If your birth certificate says you're a girl, you're a boy, you're a boy. If your birth certificate says you're a girl, you're a girl. It's that simple to Texas. At least it appears that's where they're going. It's definitely that simple to North Carolina. That's where the problem lies. Ladies and gentlemen, I ain't getting into this. Because I got to admit to you, it's pretty damn difficult for me. On one hand, I totally agree. Whatever your birth certificate says you are, that's who you should be. If you have to go and get an operative procedure and that changes your sex, I don't get that either. But, I'm a black man. And I do understand what prejudice is. I do understand what a lot of isms are, whether it's racism, sexism, etc. And if transgender people are saying they are vehemently discriminated against, vilified, harassed, etc., etc., we live in a society that tries to be sensitive to an abundance of people, this wonderful democracy that we live in. This quote-unquote gorgeous mosaic. We're supposed to be inclusionary, not exclusionary. I understand both sides. I'm completely divided on this, which is why I lean towards what the governor is saying in terms of the NFL minding its business. Here's why. And I'm not saying I'm totally right. Please don't get me wrong. I'm saying I understand what the Texas governor is saying. I'm not saying that the NFL should do it. I'm saying I understand where the Texas governor is coming from. Because what he's saying is him and his constituency, meaning the people he represents, feel this way. They're not coming from it from just a political perspective, but in their eyes from a moral perspective. And if you're the NFL, can you legitimately say that when you're projecting to make $18 billion or more a year? When you are all about padding your wallets? When your actions have proven with everything that you do? When you're going as far as willing to charge people to perform for you at halftime of a Super Bowl? Can you honestly say that you're not about your money? And if you're all about your money and ingratiating yourself into a particular issue because it will resonate in such a way that will galvanize folks to come and add revenue to your coffers, does that elevate itself above a moral position that even though he's a politician, he is still making on behalf of his constituency, which entails millions who are like-minded in their thinking, that this Texas bill, which would require that people who use bathrooms, that it corresponds to the sex on their birth certificate, if he's speaking on behalf of them, does he not come from a higher moral ground than a sports league who clearly ingratiates itself into a situation because from a revenue perspective, from a monetary perspective, it might be advantageous to them? I think they do. I think that Texas holds the higher moral ground here because it's not about money. It's about morals and principles to the governor of Texas and his constituency. Whereas the NFL is speaking on behalf of itself because it knows that if it takes a different position, it could ultimately affect their wallets in a detrimental fashion. It's a tough debate. And on one hand, I'm all about corresponding with the sex on your birth certificate. On the other hand, I'm sensitive to any group, transgenders, LGBT, and beyond. Anybody who potentially faces discrimination, I side with them because none of us should be going to do that. We should be living and let living. But here's the problem, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm going to put it out there. And I'm going to say it. I'm a dad. 2 daughters, 10 nieces. I got to tell you something. If my daughter's in the bathroom and somebody comes in there, that's a man, whatever procedures you had to make you look like a woman, how comfortable am I with that? How comfortable should I be with that? It's a rhetorical question, but nevertheless one that still requires an answer if we're fair. 866-729-3776 is the number to call up. This 866-729-ESPN. It's the Stephen A. Smith Show on 98.7 FM. It's the Stephen A. Smith Show on 710 ESPN LA. It's the Stephen A. Smith Show on ESPN Radio, Sirius XM, Channel 80, nationwide. Don't touch that dial. Dial up and holler at me. I'm right here, back with more in a minute.
Guess what? You're in the middle of the Stephen A. Smith Show podcast. Damn it, I mean it!
4 things to point out before I go to the phone calls. Right here back on the Stephen A. Smith Show, ESPN Radio. 866-729-ESPN. That's 866-729-3776. I was on 710 ESPN LA this morning talking with Keyshawn Johnson and the crew about Draymond Green. We didn't get an opportunity to talk about this Texas bathroom bill. But let me say this. This Texas bill that's coming up, it's similar to a North Carolina law that prompted the NCAA to pull 7 championship events from the state last year. It's backed by Republican Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, who's considered a powerful figure in the state, who had cited the Houston Super Bowl as proof that big events will stick around. So I guess that the Governor Abbott, who was quieter before, is being a bit more outspoken now. It also says here, despite persistent misinformation in the media, under Senate Bill 6, all Texas teams will be able to set their own policies at the stadiums and arenas where they play and hold their events. There is no conflict with the NFL statement today in Senate Bill 6. So in other words, it's just the NFL doing its own thing. The teams themselves have a right to do what they want to do. But I also went there, reminding the world I'm a daddy. There are daddies and mamas out there that would have a question about that bathroom bill as it pertains to their children being encountered, being in the same vicinity as somebody that's transgender. Which is why we should leave it to the politicians in dicey situations like that. We know what our preferences may be and what have you, but these are supposed to be individuals who are more informed than us. I do believe that the governor of Texas does have a point, though. I think he has a higher moral ground to stand on compared to the NFL when he sits there and says, I'm speaking on behalf of my state and my constituency. Because he's essentially saying that the NFL is speaking on behalf of their wallet. In other words, stick to football and leave politics to us. If it's somebody associated with a political arm or a political action committee, that would be different. Now, those of you out there who say, look, well, athletes have spoken out. You got to remember, those athletes spoke about things that were personal to them. You're a black man. You speaking about racism. You qualified in most instances. But if you ain't transgender, how you arguing on behalf of transgender folks without all the facts? I don't know. I just don't know. 866-729-ESPN. That's 866-729-3776. Jarrell in Tennessee. You're live at Stephen A. on ESPN Radio. Jarrell, good afternoon. How are you?
Good afternoon, Stephen A. Thank you so much for taking my call, man. It's truly a blessing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Go ahead real quick, buddy.
Yes, sir. Okay, the Texas bathroom bill. I have a problem with the NFL as well as the NBA and the NCAA. They're quick to move these events for the LGBT community, but as soon as the black men, which the leads are 90% black males, as soon as they speak out about their injustices or how they feel, they have a problem with it. Like, for instance, Ferguson, when the St. Louis Rams, those guys wore the T-shirts, they had a problem with it. They had to go back and kiss up to the police department or whatnot. You know, they weren't talking about moving the Super Bowl or whatever then. You know, same thing about NBA. When LeBron speaks out or the black man speaks out, they have a problem with it. But anytime the 1% of the LGBT community has something to say, they want to just up and move these big events.
Let me stop with you and let me tell you why I disagree, because I believe your position is a moral position, Jarrell. Let me tell you why I disagree with you. Having a problem with it is entirely different than refusing to host events in respective cities because of issues. It's not like, I guarantee you that if a state tried to institute Jim Crow laws, for example, once again, the NFL and the NBA would stand up and say, hell no. When Donald Sterling, spewed his racial diatribe and was caught on video, they banned him for life. There have been instances where the leagues themselves have stepped up, where transgressions against a group of people, a community of people have been exercised. They've stood up and said, no way, we're not going to tolerate that. That's entirely different than you having a problem with what a particular athlete says. You have a right to disagree with somebody. You have a right to sit up there and say somebody should have said or should not have said that. That's entirely different than something of this issue. I do not believe the two are relatable. I think you're trying to relate something that's not relatable.
I don't know. I beg the difference, Stephen A. It's all the same, man. If you have a problem with it, like, Baltimore, Chicago, all the violence up there, do something about that. If you want to move some events.
Whoa. I just factually proved to you that it's not relatable, because in one instance, you're just talking about people having a problem or not having a problem with something. In another instance, you're talking about the NBA moving the event to another state. You're talking about the NFL threatening not to have a Super Bowl in those respective cities. I'm saying to you, those kind of things happened because it was community-based. You're talking about a race of people or a particular group, whether it's the LGBT or transgender. You've got all of that going on. If something was happening like that universally to black people, I do think you would see the league stand up. This is not a case of that. Those incidences that you're talking about, whether it's a Trayvon Martin, whether it's the Ferguson issue or something else, I don't think the two correlate. But I appreciate your perspective and I understand the emotion. Let's go to John in New York. You're live with Stephen A. on ESPN Radio. What's up, John?
Hi, Stephen A. Thank you for talking about these two topics. I called to comment on Draymond Green, but I'm the father of a transgender kid, and I'm a little choked up because I'm hurt. Every time my born male, now female, goes into a bathroom, she's not there to harm your kid.
Right.
She's there to go to the bathroom. And it's that kind of attitude that scares me every day, of my child walking around the streets. And how are they going to be perceived? Are they going to be hurt by people that are prejudiced, that people are not understanding of basic human rights? Do you think my child chose that life?
No, I don't think
That's
so.
not the case.
Right. Are you still there, John?
Yeah,
John,
I'm
are
here.
you still there? Yes. I totally understand where you're coming from, and I empathize with you as a parent. I can only imagine what you're going through because you live every day in fear that prejudice is going to somehow detrimentally affect your child. My heart goes out to you, and I'm certainly sensitive to that, and I certainly don't want to come across as somebody who is not. And I'm not casting aspersions or judgment. I'm not casting aspersions or judgment against anyone from the transgender community, and particularly their loved ones who live every day in support and hope and prayers for a better day for them in terms of us living in a society that's far more tolerant. I'm simply pointing out the fact that you're going to have folks that are not receptive to that. How do you respond to it? Like, for example, if you are a parent who has a child who has absolutely positively nothing against your child or anybody from the transgender community, but it's just something that you're not comfortable with. How do you deal with that? And I asked that question, a sincere question to you, John, in this respect. The sensitivity, the heightened level of sensitivity that you have is greatly attributed to the fact that you have a child who's going through that, who is that person. But if you didn't have that child, would you know and would you have the same level of sensitivity? I'm saying that's the challenge that you and your child and everyone in support of the transgender community has to deal with, and I don't think that could be ignored, sir. Your response.
Well, I completely agree with you, which, was the reason I called in initially, because I'm a 54-year-old white male, and I have no right to comment on the Draymond Green thing because I've never been in those shoes, obviously. Right. But what I will say, as being a very liberal person and having grown up in a 50-50 black-white community, that when there's no need for Draymond Green to speak maybe a little bit too aggressively or exaggerate a situation, then he won't. When things are even, there won't be any need for Draymond Green to say something like that. We live in a racist society and an unaccepting society of people who aren't the same as the white heterosexual male, and that is wrong.
You know what, John? That's a profound statement on your part, and I deeply appreciate you.
And I am a white heterosexual male.
Hey, do me a favor. Anytime these kind of issues come up, feel free to call into the show, because I definitely think what you just said enlightens a whole bunch of us, and I appreciate your comments. I think you're right on the money.
I appreciate your show and discussing the topics that, people want to turn away from.
All right, man. Thank you so much, John. I deeply appreciate you as well. 866-729-3776 and 729-866-729-ESPN makes a very, very valid point. Because did y'all grasp what he just said? What he was just saying is that if you normalize the situation, if you make it so, this is what it is. Moving forward, that prejudice, that fear, or whatever it is that inhibits you from embracing and accepting something different than what you're accustomed to, suddenly it won't be that different anymore. And it would open the floodgates to normalcy. And then he won't have to live in fear for a transgender child that certainly didn't ask to be that way. It's a profound point, and it's something that I think we all have to appreciate. And we have to applaud people like John for calling up and having the courage to express his point of view, knowing that he's going through what he's going through because he has a child that he lives in fear for every day because of the ignorance of the public at large, which, by the way, includes myself and so many others who simply don't know any better because we've never encountered that kind of challenge. It's something to think about, and I deeply appreciate John's words on that subject. 866-729-ESPN is the number to call up. That's 866-729-3776. You're listening live to the Stephen A. Smith Show on ESPN Radio. Back with more of your calls in a minute.
What's up, Fight fans? Brett Okamoto here from the 5 Rounds podcast. On this week's episode, myself and Brian Campbell got into all of the drama between Floyd Mayweather and Conor McGregor. Is this fight happening? We also talked to TJ Dillashaw and Dwayne Ludwig. Tune in.
You're listening to the Stephen A. Smith Show podcast.
My main nemesis on First Take every weekday morning on ESPN is Max Kellerman, along with the lovely moderator, Molly Karam. But another nemesis is Mr. Will Cain, former conservative talk show host, now in the world of sports, shows up on First Take a few times a week himself. He's got a lot to say about both Draymond Green and the Texas governor issue involving transgender folks. And he'll be on with us at the top of the hour, approximately 10 minutes from now. 866-729-ESPN is the number to call up. That's 866-729-3776. Let's go back to the phones. Let's go to Anthony in the Bronx. You're live with Stephen A. on ESPN Radio. What's up, Anthony? How are you?
Good. How are you, Stephen A?
I'm doing all right. Roll up your window, man. Too much wind we're hearing. Go ahead.
I got a problem with that Texas governor telling the NFL not to speak on an issue. I got a problem with anybody telling anybody not to speak on the issue because it's not in their lane. That's a huge problem right there. Same thing with Draymond getting bashed on, saying, oh, you stick to basketball, don't speak on this. Or Colin Kaepernick, everybody telling him throw a football, don't speak on that. That's a problem right there. I don't care.
Whoa. Compartmentalize. Draymond Green, I didn't hear anybody saying you're a player, play, don't speak on those issues because he's qualified to have an opinion on it. I just don't think he had all the facts. In the case of the governor of Texas going after the NFL and telling the NFL to stay in its lane, what I took from him that he was saying is that I'm a politician with constituency to represent who have a moral position on this issue. You as a league, you're just trying to make money. He didn't sit there and say an NFL player should speak. He was basically saying to the league office, don't act like you care. You're just here to make money. That's not what we're about. That's what he was saying.
So who has a right to speak on these things then? Regardless of, take the money issue out of it. The point is that they stood up for something and they're putting a message out there that a lot of people are scared to. So my question is, who's allowed to speak then?
Well, everybody's allowed to speak. Everybody's allowed to speak, but there are others who are allowed to tell them to shut up. And the Texas governor has a right to his opinion just like the NFL has a right to theirs. And that's for them to confront with one another. The issue itself is for us to debate like everybody else. But I didn't hear the Texas governor saying NFL players shut up and play. He said that he's basically saying to the league, stop acting like you care, because if it wasn't affecting your bottom line or you didn't think it was going to affect your bottom line, you wouldn't be saying anything. So stick to the NFL and let us stick to politics. That's why he brought up the Deflategate scandal. The Texas governor called them out on Twitter by saying, you know what, they suspend Tom Brady, and then they turned around and they had him hosting the Super Bowl championship. See what they know. That's what he was trying to say.
And as far as the Draymond, on ESPN this morning, I heard the narrative from folks on the radio, the narrative saying, well, he makes a good salary. He drives a nice car. Maybe he shouldn't be talking about
they're
wrong.
Wrong. They're wrong. They got a lot of nerve. You could attack what he said and say he didn't have all the facts, which is what I say. But don't attack his right to speak up. He's a black man. He feels that racism is something that's prevalent in the world of sports and beyond. He spoke out about it. I certainly have no problem with it. Anthony, I got to run. I appreciate the call. Thank you so much. But Draymond definitely has a right to say what he said. I have no problem with that whatsoever. It's just that you got to know all the information before you went as far as he went. Will Kane, my nemesis on First Take, my secondary nemesis. Max is the first. Will Kane will be up next with hour number 2. Right here at the Stephen A. Smith Show, ESPN Radio.
That's just a sample of what you'll hear on the Stephen A. Smith Show. Weekdays at 1 p.m. Eastern on Sirius XM Channel 80 and the ESPN app. The NBA All-Star Game this Sunday.
Here's Curry behind the back. Half-court heave on its way. And he hits it!
Coverage begins Sunday at 7:30 Eastern on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app.